again, I'm really glad that we're able to do this, and my sincere apologies for getting the time wrong. Um, did Juniper fill you guys in a little bit on what we have done before, and or just that we did this with one of our smaller pieces, and we like how we watched it, and then if we had something we wanted to talk about, we would pause it and sort of pause the video to talk about it. So it doesn't need to be a continuous watching of the video, if that makes sense. Like it's not a live commentary, so to speak. So we can just pause it at any time. Or if there's something like, oh, I want to talk about this part in the beginning, we can go back to it, what have you. It's really about I mean, I really think it's like using or I guess part of maybe one of my thoughts, and Juniper obviously jump in, but that there had been an idea of like enriching people's experience of it. So it's not necessarily that they would be like, oh, this is their viewing of the duet. It would be that they would then get to go watch it again, if that makes sense, with like a newer understanding in a sense of it. And another thing that we talked about is that, for us, like, as you guys know, I think, who we work with is so important because we need really fantastic dancers, and we also need really like people who are able and willing to delve into the more emotional, psychological research elements of the work. So it's not just about like showing up and dancing, but all of the components that go into it and being willing to be involved in context and research and all of that. And I feel like with Clear and Sweet, um, it was such an amazing rehearsal and research process. And in some ways, I think that the duet between the two of you was was really unique and special just in our and Juniper and Maya's work in the past. Um, and so I just really wanted to talk to you all, mainly also because of um, my interest in, and I mean, it's a little embarrassing sort of saying this because it's just such a layperson's understanding of like the brain and what it does. But my interest and I think Juniper's interest in as well as like spatial memory and grid cells and place cells, and how I think that is so related to dance. And that I feel like, you know, Dominic, you weren't a part of the very beginning research. Navarre was the only one at Baryshnikov Art Center where we started really, I think I maybe brought in some of that research and some of that ideas, and I had kind of let it go. And then we started working on the duet, and then we decided that we wanted to put you in a blindfold, and then you, without ever talking about it, you just sort of did the thing that we had been researching or interested in months beforehand. And so to me, that duet has always felt really, really special for multiple reasons. But the reasons of like, I have no idea how you two did what you did. And that I'm really curious about that process. And I'm also really curious about like maybe the experience that we have watching it is not at all the experience you have in it. So I mean, I guess, like, for me, I just am like, how did you so many well, a lot of people said asked me if you could see through your blindfold, which could you?
No, I couldn't. I think, I mean, what we didn't see just now, but we did, like, as the transition between the section before and this, how we walk back and forth, I don't, like, 3 times, something like this, I think it was. Um, Somehow put me in this, like, it put me in sync with Navara, even if I wasn't counting. You counted steps, no? Like we had some kind of like structure set in place, that because we would constantly go further back or less far back each time. So somehow this, I think, really helped me orient like on the diagonal, so that like I could get my bearings at least on that. And I think that helped a lot, at least for the beginning part of it, until things got to progress.
Right, because that moment right there is the first moment where you're not together going backwards and forwards, and so you have to find her blindly.
Yeah, which sometimes did not work that smoothly.
Yeah,
if I'm not mistaken.
yeah, that was a very smooth version, and I think that sort of randomness of it made it very, very each time it happened, it became very specifically emotional for that day in a way that I think was, I don't know, it's very different because I don't know, it sort of honed in on, it felt like it honed in on you, the two of you as performers in the space on that particular day in a way that I haven't really seen as easily when someone's just like performing the different things. This was like you could see, I don't know, introduce some struggle that you could observe. That was really like for me beautiful to watch.
Probably
Yeah.
also. Go. Sorry.
No, I was just talking about that very first moment, like the first time that Dominic's on his own and has to find me. I'm agreeing with you, Juniper, that it really set like the tone for who I was for him that day. Like if it took him 5 minutes, I mean, that was probably the longest ever, but if it took him a long time to find me, suddenly I felt like, okay, I have a different responsibility here. And
right.
If he came right at me and joined me right away, it felt like, okay, this is a different track that we're riding on today. And so there, in a way, there was a lot of suspense in that first moment.
Yeah, I guess it,
you know,
sets up the whole duet, like you said, in the sense that like, I feel secure because I know I found you right away. So I kind of also feel like, okay, we're in a good place, that I'm not going to lose her. Like, and that emotionally, how my feeling of losing you or not losing you really registers very differently, depending on how secure I am in knowing where you are without properly knowing.
So what would that do? Like when you guys talk about the sort of calibration of reading where you are in this sort of like space and dynamic between each other, what would that do? Or like, how did you, I guess I'm also really curious. Well, because I sort of really left you two alone to make this duet. You know, like I gave you, I think, the barest structure of it, and then you really crafted it and filled it in. I mean, that's how I remember it. I could be wrong. And then, would say like, okay, what about this? What about that? And so I'm really curious about how did you come to this process with each other of knowing to calibrate and how to calibrate and respond to each other?
Oh.
I mean, I think I can. When I think when I was doing it, I was thinking much more on like a human and relationship level about the piece than like a physical spatial. But although now when I'm watching it, I feel I can actually relate to, I can speak to things physically in terms of space that I was thinking, but I feel like the whole progression, I always felt like this was a relationship that's been going on for a long time, and that like every passage is just another day, another like stage in it, and it's been going on, and I feel like it's just in the same way that within the same relationship, each day you can play a slightly different role for each other. And you can be like, some days you need to be a little bit more sensitive, and some days you need to be a little bit more forward and direct, and other days you can just kind of let it ride. And that felt like that was inside of this duet too. Like it was, you know, right away at the beginning, it was like, nope, this is a day that is more sensitive. Or like I have to take a little bit more care, or no, today I can just go for it. Like, and that's kind of, that was sort of going through my mind, that if we're still talking about that very first beginning moment. But physically, I did feel like there was a lot of me thinking about how do I physically direct my body in a way that becomes more clear. Even like somehow there can be a difference between I can walk on the diagonal, or I can walk on the diagonal in a way that I feel my body is saying, this is a straight diagonal, or like, this is the direction that we're going. And it's hard to explain, but I found inside of it, there was a different physical sensation of like, I'm walking as being a guide, as opposed to like, there's another way I could walk on the diagonal, which would still be a straight path, but I wouldn't be guiding somebody. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, your physicality seems really different. I mean, it's interesting to think about. I hadn't thought about that. So it's interesting to hear that, of like your role and kind of your physical pathway or experience in the whole work does change a lot now that you're saying that. And so watching this, it is like you're so clear physically, energetically, so clear. And you know, it's funny too, like when Dominic, you were saying, oh, some days it was harder to find her than others. I mean, I remember watching it, and I think there was only one time where you seemed that you really were struggling finding her. So even knowing the piece and having seen it a million times, the external experience was quite, I think sometimes was different. Like you seemed very dead on most of, like, pretty much.
I mean, I feel that, like, first of all, there's this, like, I don't know, the irony of like Navarre leading me with the blindfold on, and then you look at these first passages that we just saw, and this thing of like actually it appearing as if, and then in different parts throughout the duet, like the power dynamic, I guess, would switch, if you want to call it that. But like these first passages, it seems like, okay, I'm the one who's deciding, like, we're going to walk, and I'm deciding that we're going to walk here. And somehow then she decides that she's going to stop, or I push her down. And sometimes she just, like, we have this game, and it's sometimes I would push her down, sometimes she would go. And in the end, she goes, she completely kind of guides me with that by taking her own decision instead of physically taking me with her. You know what I mean? And, but like getting lost, sorry, I'm maybe like jumping back and forth, but the beginning, I felt like somehow always I could more or less like find her, because like I said, we were on this rhythm, we were on this repetitious pattern of our relationship of life. And then it's in these other moments, like perhaps this one which is coming up, or one where she throws me, that then I got even more disoriented, and those became harder to be consistent about, at least for my feeling, even if from the outside it was a matter of a second or 2 seconds of me finding her. Like from the inside it felt much scarier, like, okay, I'm not really sure. Like I know that she's consistent, I know she's going to be clear and she's going to go where she needs to be, but do I know where I am in order to find her? Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. How did you, and I guess that part of saying like, how did you know where you were? How would you do that? If you could even break that down in that way.
I mean, I used, in some moments, I tried using my ears instead, like to hear when she would leave me where she would go, even though that was not always super easy because you had Kevin singing, and you had, noise of other people around, even if everybody was super quiet. Like just a shuffle at the same time that she steps can make me think that I'm hearing her stepping in a different direction than she actually was going in. So yeah, I think these first passages that were really like somehow very vital to me, feeling like I had an idea of my bearings. Otherwise, if inside of that, like I think it happened once or twice that I prepared myself in the back, waiting for her to come before we walk, and I was sure like I'm in the good direction, and she like moved me like ever so slightly, just like a small shift of angle to like walk on the diagonal the way we needed to walk, or we walked back, and on the walk back we shifted slightly, just, and that was always like, oh fuck. Because now I'm not on my straight line. She's corrected me, so I know I'm in the good place, but because where I'm coming from is not in line with where like I wanted to go, or where we're going now, like that small shift could sometimes really like make me doubt a lot about where I was. And then I would just have to kind of say like, okay, she put me here, like this is the good way, and try to like erase everything I thought in my body in terms of direction, and just go with where she put me.
And one thing I love about watching this, um, and being able to see it every day and the differences, you mentioned it in the beginning a little bit ago about this, like the power dynamic shift that happens. Because like visually, the power dynamics are for me the whole time are constantly changing between who has control, who has power, and that part and that dynamic and that back and forth where at some points it feels really clear, and then all of a sudden it shifts because of either the blindfold or the different or your inability to find her because you've just forced her to do this thing. I don't know, there was a lot of like push and pull the entire time that I just, because of the way that this was set up and the dynamic, it really put a lot of um, human relationship metaphors were kind of really encapsulated for me in this, in watching you guys. Um,
Yeah, I definitely felt that from the inside, that like within, I'm sort of saying the same thing I said before, but that there was enough time and space in the piece to really be able to go into the nuance inside of a relationship, and that things that seem so obvious maybe at first glance, like a man standing above a woman or, just like obvious metaphors.
Yeah.
So there's actually all these other layers to it.
Right.
And it's the same with, I think there is something very, I want to say voyeuristic, but almost about watching this. Like you feel like you're watching some very personal thing that's happening. I don't know. I never was in the audience, but as I'm seeing it here, the way it's lit and everything, it looks like you're looking into this world of these two people. And my hope was that from the inside was that as soon as you thought like you understood who was who in the relationship, that then we
Changed
flipped it a little bit. Yeah. And I know that there would be maybe certain moments, but for the most part, I was trying not to use tricks to help Dominic. Like I was trying not to, there were moments I'd want to breathe so heavily so that Dominic could hear my breath. And I really tried to resist doing that because I wanted it to be honest that he actually was trying to find me in this soundless, sightless place. And then there were obviously moments where that happened anyways, and so it was useful. But I remember thinking, like, I don't want to make this fake. Like, I don't want to give him a little noise and sometimes that was hard to resist.
Yeah, and there was that really made for some amazing moments. That one time where, I mean, he didn't find you on that one. It's like coming forward. I think it was on this one.
Part, I think. Yeah.
And it was like, instead of finding you like that quickly, he kind of went off to the side, and then he just started searching the ground. And every time he searched, he just got farther and farther away. And it was just like, and I was like, oh my God, I don't know how they're gonna solve this. And it was, and I think we had that idea that you weren't going to help him. There's two things to that I think are really interesting. One, the power dynamic shift that happens in that was really clear when you don't help him, because now suddenly it's like, instead of this man picking you up and pulling you around, suddenly he has no power. He can't find you, and you don't have to help him. And I'm like, that power shift was like hugely interesting, considering like all of the actions that you guys are doing. So that was one aspect of that I really enjoyed. But then that moment where I think that was like, even Zoe might have even had to get up and stop him from running into the audience. But then before she actually did, Dominic suddenly realized, just like something just shifted in Dominic's head, and he just turned around. I was like, okay, I'm doing this wrong. And but we got to like watch this like struggle, which was like so human and so like, oh, it's just such a, I don't know, for me, it was just phenomenal human like struggle moment that was played out in a way that wasn't like, oh, let's do this, but it was like, it played out in an honest way because of the things you were just saying of like, I'm not going to help you, and you are going to have to rely on these other things to get there.
Do you remember? I was just going to ask, like, do you guys remember that? I think it was in New York.
Yeah. I remember that for sure. I don't remember where it was, but
I remember getting lost, and I feel that this, what made me shift, or not necessarily in the right direction, but stop from going where, is that I heard a shift happen, and then I knew right away, like, this is not the right place for me to be, just because, I don't know, if maybe it was Zoe, maybe it was an audience member who was afraid I was going to come to them. What the noise
you had almost got to them, yeah.
But whatever noise happened made me realize that like this was like not the right, that I was not clearly going in the right direction.
What was that like, though? I mean, for both of you, like, one, Navarra not cheating and helping, and then Dominic not, like, her not helping. Like, I guess I feel like,
I think for me, it was like the biggest sign, or like one of the greatest feelings of trust that I've ever had inside of a a duet, which was like, I know that you'll find me. Like, I'm just not gonna, I know that you will eventually. And I don't feel pressure of time. I feel like there was a lot of that had like the moment that he walks towards my head, and like maybe once he accidentally kicked me, but somehow I never was afraid of that. It just felt like, I know, I mean, you know, he's not walking fast. The worst that can happen is my head bumps a little bit, but just the feeling of like, really just trust that we've done this enough together, and that the character has done it enough together. Like, not just Dominic and I, but these two people have done this over and over this is like who they are. This is, and I think we used to call, or maybe I don't know if we said it out loud, but I always used to think of the position when I was on the floor on hands and knees, that was like home.
Yeah.
That was, so there was a feeling of like, no matter what, we'll always return home. Like, we'll always go back to that. And that's, you know, sort of a reset, and sort of like okay, we're here. It's like a check-in. Like, this is where we return to every day, every time we could do this diagonal, no matter how far or how wild it gets, like, we're going to return home. So yeah, there was just really a lot of trust that, like, we both, like Dominic said, like, if I adjusted him just a tiny bit, he had to be like, okay, then she's right. She knows, you know, like, I can't hold on to what I thought was the right diagonal. And so that I felt that the whole time.
And even that, like, that statement that you just said, for me was one of the really important sort of like human relationship statements that I feel like we probably struggle with on all of our relationships. But like, when do you trust the other person enough to be able to say, I trust you? And it's just interesting that it gets played out in this dynamic of this duet in a way that sort of highlights some of those things, some of those like challenges we face as people in relationships with other people.
Yeah, and the restriction,
Like, even like, oops, sorry.
Like, if you want to call the blindfold, let's say, the restriction, or the fact that I am not allowed to help him, those restrictions also created the need for each other. Like, it's not just that I trust you, it's also that I need you.
Yeah, totally.
And he needs me. Like, we both needed each other. I cut you off, Juniper. I'm sorry.
No. You did not. I was trying to come back from not cutting you off. This moment too is like one of my favorite, is this sort of like big sort of dramatic move, especially in like a blindfolded situation, where you just start walking straight towards the audience, and you can kind of see it, I think, but they're like, you're like almost right on the audience, and it's only like the trust that you guys have to have with each other for you to stop and not walk right into the audience and topple into everybody. But it highlights some of those issues that you were just talking about in an interesting way.
I think it's also really amazing, like, you're saying of like, you trust that he'll be there and that there's time, and especially on top of the sort of performance expectations, and like, you know, come on, this is a show, things have to happen, it has to work. And you know, again, I wasn't inside of it, so I don't know, but it's interesting to hear that, because that, I mean, I guess that's in some ways why it was always really amazing to watch, is that it felt like you two had so much, I don't think confidence is the right word, but like, yeah, trust and confidence in each other and in the process, that you were able to take up time and space, and that it didn't matter. And I think in some ways that's why it wasn't clear, you know, Dominic having to constantly recalibrate himself, or you know, not constantly, but having to recalibrate what's happening, because you seemed so steady. And so it's interesting to hear that maybe the difference of the internal experience versus the external experience. And also just thinking of like, sometimes as a performer, for me personally, it's just so hard to allow myself to let something unfold inside of a process, and to say like even though this was a very set piece and section, there was a lot of improvisation and time that was very malleable inside of it. And so it's interesting to hear that, um, for sure.
Well, I guess somehow the blindfold, I know at least for myself, like allowed me to not be as caught up in other things that I would normally be inside of a duet, like timing, and like timing, I guess is the main one here. You know what I mean? I knew that there was a good amount of forgiveness in my making mistakes, even if we ran out of music, but also inside of the frame of the duet, because yeah, I mean, it's bound to happen, and I don't think someone's going to be like, well, look at him, he didn't find her, like this is boring now. Like we're going to just watch him like go around the stage, a bunch of times until he finds her. Like how long is this going to go on? But that, yeah, so I think that allowed a great sense of calm inside, um, aside from like Navarre bringing a certain amount of like weight to me. Then I could just ride with that and try to stay grounded, and if I did get lost, just if you just stand still, somehow you imagine that like you can just recalibrate just by like taking a moment to breathe, and then say like, okay, she's here, like for sure she's here, for sure somehow she will guide me to her even without cues, just by like, I don't know, energy. Also, it's I guess the frequency of like our energies like finding each other. But like going to this thing also that like about trust and time. It's like there was a certain element of like, okay, when she separates from me, like I can't just like tiptoe my way to her. I can't take all of the time in the world. And at the same time, as I think you both like experienced when we did certain improvs, like blindfolded, everything that happens to you when you're blindfolded, like is just magnified. So like a tiny shift of direction, somebody like like going like this to your shoulder, all of a sudden becomes like you got hit. Or so I remember once, I don't know how hard it was, but I was walking to her and I hit her hand, or I kicked her head or something like. And for me, it was like, oh my God, like I've just like, yeah, ran into her so hardcore. She must be in pain. I can't talk to her. Like I can't figure out what's like how big the damage was, and feeling. I don't know. There was this like thing of like feeling like, okay, I don't have the stress of time, but I can't also just, if I tiptoe, then the whole magic is gone. If I tiptoe through the whole way of finding her. So how do you be careful with trying to get to her? Because actually that it just like injects so much care inside of everything you do. This thing of like knowing like, there is an urgency to getting to her, even if it's not related to how long the duet needs to take. Somehow like this internal urgency, maybe that we've built inside of the duet, of like just going back to home, always finding her. And there's this thing as I watch it, and I don't know if we talked about it then, or if I felt it then when we were doing it, but this game thing related to home, it deals with this power dynamic of like, how you want to see it, like now I can watch it and I can see her being like, no, that's not right, I'm going back to square one. No, that's not right, I'm going back and it could be like that, or it could be me taking her and then being like, okay, we're going here, now you go back, now we're going here, now you go back. This, how many different ways you can look at it, and how actually the complexity of that inside of it is was a really nice thing to experience. Sorry, I just jumped all over the place, but
No, it's
No, but I
beautiful.
think you're right. I think also, I mean, it feels like it would be like we have to mention Kevin's singing, and that
Yeah, I was just
that
going to say
was
that
like
maybe
such
play it.
a powerful and I don't want to say calming, but like securing. Like the voice is so powerful and secure. It just felt like that also did kind of supply us with a rhythm. I mean, I'm watching him. He's also like tapping he is on a very set rhythm, but I think that there was something grounding, that's the word I'm trying to say, about his voice and that song. It's just like everything is taken care of somehow. I felt like, and
I thought I'd just play
did
it with
give
the
us the
sound.
rhythm. Yeah, supplied us with a rhythm that I think, in a way, the rhythm became as much a spatial orienteering inside of our rhythm, that like if the pace of our steps and the timing, even though we could play with it, that was also a spatial connector, I think.
And I think actually in this particular video that we're watching, like he's in the corner that we were going to, and that was not typically the case. Typically he was on his side, and so it was more like on the side of us, which I don't know if that affected us for these performances in a good way. How it affected us, I don't remember, but yeah, it's different if you're always walking towards the voice or not towards the voice. Is always on your left hand side, as I think he was most of the time.
Yeah, can you guys see my mouse?
Yeah,
because usually he's right here, but he was usually over here, I think, in the middle.
Wasn't he normally in front of us? Like this is the one where we didn't have people on all the four sides because it was a drop off, no?
Yeah. Like we don't have people on four sides because this is a proscenium.
He was normally, Dominic's right. He's normally like where the audience is now, like where
normally he'd be right there. If you can see my mouse, he would have been sitting right here instead of right here.
I think Jennifer's right, because when I would turn my head to the left at the end, I'd be looking to the altos.
Oh, because we switched where you guys were.
Oh, okay. Maybe we've done it a couple different ways then.
Well, that's also kind of the really super amazing part of it, is that we would change the size of the space over and over, and where you would be oriented, and you guys would be able to figure it out. That's a thing that I was always like, I don't know, how are you getting that? You know what I'm saying? Like, because remember we switched where the end of Pony was in relationship to how the duet started here for this piece.
Yeah, I think in this one we made lots of changes.
Yeah, we had to make a lot of changes because over here is the drop off. Then over here is a solid wall, which would have audience like this. And then we put the singers on the corners.
Yeah.
Instead of the middle of each row, because normally a singer would be in the middle of the row instead of the corner.
Yeah.
In like all the other spaces.
Should we listen? I mean, the thing I remember about Kevin singing, and then I think we should totally listen to it, is I just really remember that first rehearsal with Nathan, and remember that he was like, because we had used a different song. We used a song that we ended up using for my solo. and he was like, "Oh, I have this other song that's not in the books, but maybe it would be good." And I remember he sang it just himself, and we were all like, "Well, I don't know. I mean, yeah, totally." It was like, "Oh," and he was sort of self conscious about it. And then I think we were like, "No, it really needs to be a solo, somebody just singing it." And it was really, I just very much so remember that moment and how honest and like, oh, it was so beautiful. Do you all remember that?
Yeah.
It's really beautiful. Are you gonna play the music?
Turned it
You can share your computer audio. Did you?
Yeah, I think I didn't. Hold on, let me reshare, because when I shared this one, I knew I wasn't going to play the audio when I first started sharing it.
He starts singing after you touch her foot, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
Should I go back? I don't remember. I didn't hear it start.
Lord, be his title be. I come to know I play a part
It's nice to hear it.
Yeah, I was just thinking like two things I was thinking of, Dominic, when you were talking about how heightened everything is when you're blindfolded, like the smallest things become so big. And I guess it's interesting because there's so many other blindfolded moments in this piece, and that they all actually kind of come across or have a felt experience that are all quite different. And that maybe what was really fascinating about the duet is that kind of really the sensitivity and the sort of heightened experience really felt really came across in the duet. And so it's I'm just sort of thinking about that, and like also thinking about when I was blindfolded and doing things and just having to walk in a straight line. I mean, as you guys remember, I don't think I ever actually walked in a straight line. I think that everybody had like a really different way of calibrating, and that I just, I don't know, maybe that's why I'm so like fascinated by this, is like how did this happen? And you know, watching like the duet of Navarra and Anna, and how much that had a different feeling and sensation to it than your duet, or like Anna's blindfolded solo, and you know, all of that. So how does it feel watching it for both of you? Like I'm assuming you've watched it before, but how does it feel like it's very a different piece, or it matches, it doesn't match it? Like,
What do you mean? A different piece than the
hearing,
metal?
like than your experience of it. Does it feel different than your experience of it?
Yeah, I mean it's a video. Videos are not a fan of videos, but I felt much more daring, and and certain things feel so much bigger. But from like I said, maybe this is just in relation to the fact that I was blindfolded, so you know, one step maybe feels like a leap, or that's not a good example, but like, yeah, I remember like Navarre throwing me and me feeling like, wow, I'm going so far away, or like certain things like this, you know what I mean? Like ducking under and going back and feeling like that we were really, I mean, it was real, but like that somehow like, wow, it was so big and I don't know, crazy. Like I remember like this duet specifically now, like, and the difference between Anna and Navarra, like, and Navarra just going for it, and Navarra going for it when she's blindfolded. That's how I felt like when we were dancing. But then when I watch it, it doesn't look like that.
Yeah, I'm realizing, because I've never watched it from the outside, but I've seen it much more than Dominic has, because I could see. So to me, when I watch this now, it's kind of magical and like a little bit emotional to watch it, but it does feel like what it was somehow. I don't know.
Yeah. It is I mean, I think too, I guess I feel like I'm a little all over the place, but I remember that I have some notes of what I wanted to ask you all about. And I guess like or I haven't brought up yet so much, is that you all have had a relationship with each other and known each other for so long, and that kind of can't help but be a part of this duet. And that I think in some ways, I just remember being at Nyla when we had that rehearsal process and being like, okay, this is the shape, like the shape that Navarro's in now. That's the shape that I'm interested in. And I'm interested in this pulling back and forth, and I want it to develop. And I feel like that might have been what I said to you all, and then you like made it. And it was sort of like, oh, and the the trust that you're speaking of saying like you can wait for him, and that Dominic knowing you can find her, I feel like so much of that is your relationship to each other, and that you have this long standing relationship with each other. And I mean, I don't, it's sort of a mute point to say, like, well, what would it have been like if you don't have that relationship? Because we don't know. But you just feel like that's like a big part of this whole dynamic that we're watching. Do you guys have anything to say about that? I mean, it's sort of like I guess it's a little bit of a weird question, or not a question. But do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I agree. I don't think that it's not that I didn't trust the other dancers inside of this piece, for example. And it's not that we couldn't necessarily create something similar. But yeah, there's something very special about spending so much time with somebody and knowing them, and then this trust that is needed, or this care that is needed for it to work and for things not to go wrong or people to get hurt. It's there without having to speak about it. It's just, yeah. So she could throw me wherever she wanted, and I wouldn't doubt it. Mm-hmm. Like maybe I would with somebody else. Like maybe I didn't find you because you actually didn't put me there. Not that I would really go there, but like I don't know. I just think that yes. I agree that our knowledge of each other as friends, as people, like our life experiences together, definitely enriches, if not the duet itself, my experience of the duet for sure.
Yeah, I could not agree more with everything. I mean, I'm watching it, and just like the feeling of it, I'm just realizing what a gift it was, the duet. Mm. So thank you guys for that. But also just like, I think we felt it every night, was like, this is a gift that we're getting to do this again and share it. Both those things are.
I know, I really miss this duet. I gotta say, maybe we should just do it again. I mean, it also does feel like, I think there's some pieces that you can't pull parts of it out, and it wouldn't, it just wouldn't work. But watching this, I'm like, I feel like this would work outside of the whole context of the piece. It would be very different, but I feel like it would work. I also think that maybe, unlike other parts of this piece or any other work, I feel really biased. And I feel really unable to sort of look at it with any objective, discerning eye. And I think that was actually I don't know, like even just remembering like the three of us watching you all and feeling so much sort of a container, and sort of holding this container for you all, and kind of like the heightened awareness and presence in it was really different, even more so than when, the duet of Anna and Navarro being blindfolded, and Troy going through and it's a different thing. And even here, it was even more different because there's the wall and then there's literally a drop off down, which I mean, I think it's funny to like, I just remember Dominic sort of expressing to me, being like, you know, how you say their names is really important. And it'll give them a sense of whether or not they should be stressed out or scared or not. And that I feel like I learned a lot from you, Dominic, of being like, okay, I gotta be like, I have to be grounded and calm, or else it's gonna be scary for them. And how do you, how does that happen? And that I just remember you spent so, I don't know, you were really, really quite good at being like, I do need to call their names now. I don't need to call their names. How do I do it? The timing of it, how close, how loud. I mean, it was a really, like, this part was really calibrated in a way, or really like, I guess there's like in this piece, I feel like there's all these things that go into it that are very hidden in a sense. Like, in order for it to work, they all have to disappear. All the work has to disappear for this to work. You know what I'm saying? Like, it can't be obvious the tone and inflection of our voice, or how close we are, or the timing of when we say stop, or like those things almost have to disappear in order for this to work, kind of thing. I don't know. I mean, that was my feeling of it, so that it didn't become about us stopping them, kind of thing. Like, even watching this now, I'm getting nervous watching them walk towards the wall. Because I feel like
I just freaked her out. I mean,
Yeah.
you were so, Navarro, you really did go for it no matter what. It was amazing to watch. It really was such an amazing thing to watch. And
I felt like when I was blindfolded, it felt for me almost like a liberating thing.
huh,
Like, I don't know because I don't remember, but I feel like it's like when kids think you can't see them,
yeah, totally.
you know?
And I remember that. I think that idea. I remember you guys. We talked. I mean, obviously, we talked about this section quite a lot about how to help each other, and so much of this piece was about figuring out how to help each other. And I feel like I do remember that conversation where Dominic was like saying, like, there's a difference of how you call out to people, because in this section, that's what you guys are doing. You are their safety, so that they can have that feeling of being completely free while being blinded and not being able to see what's going on. But the only way they can have that feeling of freedom was to know that they could trust you guys to stop them before they did something.
yeah.
And it was also great to watch, like, everybody learn how to do that, um, and how just the idea of like that one where um, Navarra almost got the wall, and because Dominic, there was differences, like every time we did this, there was differences of how you guys, when would you allow yourselves to step in, and
Yeah.
having that be very different emotionally for between Zoe and Dominic, and how that was very different and had difference, and it shifted over time too, because there was different times where different people had different wants about how to take care of that. I don't know, it was very, there was a lot going on in this whole piece that required everyone to really uh, challenge their relationships, I think, and um, influence their relationships.
Yeah.
So it's just,
I think I remember that one, or not one, like I feel like we spent a fair amount of time just playing with being blindfolded in rehearsal and doing all these improvs, and like was it Navara or Anna, like walking across the bars in the studio, in that really small studio off of Canal or Broadway, and blindfolded, and that at one point, I think it might have been you, Dominic, I can't remember, but somebody was like, you know what the thing is about being blindfolded is that you're asking everybody else to take care of you. And this sort of like switch of power that you mentioned, or both of you, somebody mentioned earlier, of saying like, oh, the person who's blindfolded is actually in control more or less, because you're asking everybody else to make sure you're okay and to take care of you, as opposed to this thing of what it might first appear as like, oh, they're vulnerable and they need help. And it felt really like eye-opening in that experience. Have you guys watched this?
No, I haven't seen this like edited like this. It's really beautiful.
I don't.
Did you do that, Juniper?
Oh no, this was Bates. This was at Bates, and they had 3 cameras.
I think they did such a nice job. It's really.
Yeah, they had the one that was up above there was like a catwalky stair thing. That's where this shot is from. That just gives you a perspective that really helps sort of make the space make sense. And then also the camera shot from the front, which you wouldn't be able to do. Like this shot also gives you a really good sense of what was going on, which isn't really possible in like where it was in the round. Like the other filmings didn't really have that ability to get those shots. And so the shots are like were really effective in sort of giving the sense of what was happening on stage.
Yeah, I think the only one I saw was from On the Boards, and then they also had like fancy camera things, but like Juniper said, like the perspectives of them were different, and because the stage was set up differently, then it just reads in a way. Somehow the lighting here feels so like, I don't know, beautifully golden and I don't know.
Those pictures of us in the storm section, like where you're doing that really big leap, and I think a lot of the pictures that we ended up using for this is from Bates. Yeah. We can, I think this is the link that I sent you guys too, so I feel like
I think you said the other one.
Oh, I did. Ooh, sorry. Well, you
yeah.
have this, obviously. You can have this link in these photos. But what was I going to say? I think, so one thing Juniper and I have been talking about when we were like going back through this piece and talking about wanting to talk to you both and listening to those podcasts and the things, is that like how, even like in that, and just watching the what was that? Oh my God, what was that one called? I don't remember what we called that part of it, but even watching that, like Dominic, your legs were straight on the end, and like watching how both you and Navara were the bookends, and Navara was starting to do that, and how like Troy would always have to fix my legs when I laid down, because I would also just start to like turn. And I'm really curious. I was like, I would love for us to do this piece sometime, or like you guys do the duet, we do this part and have MRI, like have some sort of brain imaging to read like what's going on in our brain and what's being fired and where, that allows us to do this. Because, like people study and can read and map, like, okay, here's mapping cells, here's the grid cells, here's the spatial cells in our brain, and that they have these particular things. And they know, like some people's fire really well, some people it doesn't. And I'd be so curious to see like what's actually happening in our brains. And I think that for me, part of it was that this is what dancers do anyway. Like, how is it that we know where people are in space when we can't see them, or we know how to judge distance and space and relationships in that way without having to like make a big deal out of it, kind of thing. You know what I'm saying? Or like what that I feel like we get trained unconsciously in mapping ourselves into space.
Well, this has been amazing. Thanks. I mean, this was phenomenally interesting to like be able to go through. So thanks for coming and doing this with us today.
So
It's awesome.
fun. Such a great idea.
Navara, thank you so much. And thank you, Dominic. This is really
Yeah.
great. And let's keep going. Let's do more.